Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance to working Rhode Islanders. We hope you enjoy this edition.
Production of the Rhode Island Institute for Labor Studies and Research. I'm Thom Cahir from the Rhode Island AFL-CIO. Today with us we have State Senator Sandra Cano, and we'll be talking about the upcoming census. Hi, Senator. Thanks for coming in today to talk about the census. Can you tell our viewers a little about the census, what it is, when do we do it, and why it's so important?
Thank you so much, Tom. First, I appreciate you taking the time to talk about such an important issue like the census. The census is officially the count of the population of our nation, and it happens every 10 years. And it is important because it gets tied to many things such as resources for the federal government, and also our representation in Congress. So depending on our population and how we count people, then we have a designation of congressional seats to represent us at the national level. And the funding is important because depending on how many people we have in a state such as Rhode Island, then there is dedicated funding that comes to support housing, health, SNAP programs for children. So there's many things that come into place when it comes to the census. So every 10 years it happens, and we will have our census in 2020, so it's a year from now, and it will be April 1st, 2020. Everybody should remember that day.
Okay, and so next year around this time, it'll be taking place. What's at stake in the 2020 census?
Well, it is important that we recognize that we have to count everybody in order to retain a congressional seat in our state, but also $3.1 billion get allocated to Rhode Island for a year, 10-year period.
Okay.
So it would be around $3 million per year, which is a lot of good resources that again goes towards our family's support when it comes to school, education, health. So there is a lot of things that are at stake if we don't count everybody in Rhode Island.
All right. Okay, so everybody needs to be counted is basically what needs to be done. And what is different about the census that's upcoming next year?
So the first time that we will have an online census will be next year. So the Census Bureau is trying to ask everybody to fill out the formulary online. So that is very different from years before. I think that it's important that everybody recognize that everybody in Rhode Island has access to online to be able to fill out that questionnaire. So we need to work together to make sure that the census gets filled out by everybody, and that we could get resources available for people to be able to have online access to get to fill it out. Now, I understand also that if you, it's 5 attempts. It's 5 attempts that you get.
Okay.
So if you don't get by the 3rd attempt, if you don't get a questionnaire fill out online, then they will send you a paper one. Okay. But the first thing that they're gonna do is they're gonna try for you to fill out a questionnaire online.
All right, so nobody will be knocking on your door.
Well, they're trying to knock at your door, but that is just the last resource.
Okay.
And they're not putting a lot of money into people on the streets to do that, like they did in years before, because the resources were cut down from the federal level for the census. So we are doing the census in 2020 with the same resources we had in 2010. So if you think about it, that is the reason why they're doing the online.
Better use of resources.
Exactly.
Okay, so, and this year we also have the question of citizenship on the census. What's the deal with that?
Well, that is an important question. I think that due to the current environment in Washington, D.C., a lot of our residents in Rhode Island feel uncomfortable filling out that question. So right now, there is still a case in the courts waiting to be resolved to see if that question will indeed be in the census for 2020. Let's put the scenario that it will be in the census. So what happens? I'm a citizen of the United States. I'm also a proud immigrant. I could just leave that question blank, and the federal government has to count me in. That doesn't mean that they could share your information because the census is confidential.
Right.
So I would suggest that even though there is a lot of fear in the community, and even though people are scared of what would happen with that information of whether or not you are a citizen, we'll just leave that question blank, and you still get counted. That is my suggestion, and that is what I will do as a citizen of the United States.
Right. So that is a viable option. You can just leave that question blank.
That is one. Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. Recently, there was a rally at the State House last week, right? How did that go?
It went very well. I think that what we're trying to do with the Rhode Island Complete Count Committee, which is a group that the governor put in effect in an executive order in December of 2018, and we started meeting in February. This group got together with many businesses, the labor community, the community-based organizations to bring awareness that a year from last week, it will be Census Day. So what we did was we had a rally. We also had a resolution both in the Senate and in the House to pass this resolution to make sure that every Rhode Islander know that it's officially Census Action Day, a year from April 1st. So it's awareness, education, and it was important to highlight what needs to happen from now until then. We need to have a strategy to outreach and to make sure that we count every Rhode Islander. We also need resources for that. So I'd like to give you a little detail of what we had so far. So the governor had appropriated in the budget $150,000 for census strategy. The Rhode Island Complete Count Committee had identified that we need $1.2 million to make sure that we count every Rhode Islander, at least $1.2 million. The Rhode Island Foundation graciously came in and already put aside $250,000 to this outreach, which we are very grateful with the efforts of the Rhode Island Foundation, which means that we are trying to advocate for $350,000 more from our General Assembly, and that's what we try to do. After the rally, we had a Senate Finance Committee hearing for the census. It went very well. The senators were very diligent in asking questions of where this money is going to go and why do we need this money. And I think that it was very not only informative, but it was a good way of educating everybody that this is something that we cannot let behind. This should be a priority for all, and we should all work together towards that goal of counting everybody, because currently we have 24% of our population in Rhode Island as hard to count communities. Oh. So that is important. That percentage is a little high, and then so we need to make sure that we get to all of those communities.
All right. Well, you pretty much answered my next two questions that were basically, what is the state doing to get ready for the census, and is there money in the state budget for the census? So
the process of the money in the state budget hasn't been finalized yet.
Okay.
We still have a lot of work to do. Okay. I think that we have a start with the $150,000 that the governor had put aside towards these strategy efforts, but we also are very conscious that we need to raise the allocation of state funding to $500,000, that's what we're asking, but we also need to raise the other $700,000, which Out of that, 250 had been allocated from the Rhode Island Foundation. So we still need private businesses, other foundations to come and help us get that money so we could get to that $1.2 million to make sure that we outreach to the hard-to-count communities.
Any other nonprofits or anybody else, any other interested parties come forward yet to say that they're interested in donating?
Sure. In the Rhode Island Complete Count Committee, we have the United Way of Rhode Island. We have the Champlain Foundation. So we're all working together towards the same goal. It's a matter of getting to that number and making sure that we do the pledge and allocate that money to make sure we get to that $1.2 million.
All right, you mentioned hard-to-count communities. What would you consider those to be?
So that could be from the range of low-income communities, seniors, young people, immigrants, or the minority community. That is what we call hard-to-count communities. And believe it or not, we do have very spread out hard communities around the state.
Yes.
It's not located in one city. We do have it all across our state, and we need to make sure we get to them. Remember, seniors don't have access to the internet. They know, and they don't trust so many of the people nowadays.
My mom.
So it is important that we take the responsibility of helping, working maybe with the housing authorities to make sure that they do know that this information is safe and help them through the process. We need resources for that, and that is why it's so critical.
Now, it was also mentioned to me that college kids around, especially around URI, around campuses like Roger Williams and Bryant,
Right.
Are areas that those kids can be counted because they're residents 9 months a year. They use our resources, and those are areas that we should concentrate on as well.
Absolutely. That's why we do have a lot of our education institutions on the table as the Complete Count Committee meets every month. We make sure that the message is there and everybody gets the same message. And then the next step of this is the strategy to make sure that we get to the students, to make sure that we have people going on campus, doing workshops, doing whatever it takes to make sure that everybody fills out that census questionnaire.
Fantastic. What can our union members do to help with the census taking?
I think that is a very important question. I believe that awareness is the most important thing. Not a lot of people realize that census is coming in 2020, and if you take the time to tell your family members, your friends, and then we do that as we continue to bring the awareness and the education, it's going to be easier for people to realize that that is important. It is also very crucial to know that this is the first time in 2 decades that we have a census during a presidential election. So that is also important. Why? Because civic engagement could be a way of getting people to be aware that the census is at the same time that our presidential election is coming. So we need to tie the message somehow. The other important issue that I believe for most of the people just bring the awareness factor is that this could be the first time since 1789 that we could lose a congressional seat.
Yes.
The first time since 1789. So that is important for all Rhode Islanders to know. We don't want to have less representation in Washington for our state.
No.
If anything, we want to retain and keep our seat. And I do know that it's important that we all work together to get that done. So I think it's important that we continue the awareness and education.
Thank you for coming in today. This has been extremely informative, and we'll get this out to our members. And thanks for coming on. Thank you for watching Labor Vision.
Hello, and welcome to Labor Vision, a production of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. I am your host, Erica Hammond, and joined with me today from the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, Local 328, is Secretary-Treasurer Domenic Pontarelli and Organizer Sam Marvin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
All right, I know you've both been on the show a few times, and I know that you were just recently on Domenic talking about the Stop and Shop strike, so some of our viewers may already know a lot about UFCW, but just for those who don't, can you go into a little bit of detail about the union, who you represent?
Well, we represent retail, Stop and Shop, we have nursing homes, we also represent bus companies.
Yep.
And we also represent cafeteria workers. Okay. And just about everybody, if they call us, we'll represent them.
Okay. And now the biggest reason that you guys are here today is to talk about the issues going on at the Durham School Services, right? Can you tell us a little bit about give us a background on the company?
Sure. We had an election back in September, actually September 19th, for the bus monitors, bus aides, and the bus drivers that service Cumberland Public Schools, Blackstone Valley Prep, and Providence Merrill Academy. So there's 3 different contracts within one schoolyard. So we actually had a campaign over last summer, talking about the issues that they face with on a daily basis, including low wages. These low wages lead to shortages in drivers and monitors, which jeopardizes the safety and the ability for these workers to do their jobs. So we had a campaign, we had an election, we won the election, and we're now in negotiations to try to bring wages up and bring these workers a workplace of dignity and respect.
And you highlighted them briefly, but can you talk a little bit more about some of the main issues affecting the bus drivers and monitors?
Yes, wages is the biggest issue here. The bus drivers, they start at $18 an hour and they're capped at $22. The monitors, it's just the flat rate is $11.22. I mean, you could be there 10 years and make $11.22. Right. So that's a serious issue with safety because you need to retain help and pay them to retain help. So that's a problem with the getting people to work there and keeping them there too. So wages are the major issue in this negotiation.
You mentioned there's flat rates and then there's a cap. You don't see this across like many other sectors, right? As a norm. So people who have been there, I know that Sam, you mentioned this a few days ago as well. People who have been there for 20 years are still at the same rate that they were when they started, or
and actually with the cap being at 21, you have workers there that have been doing this job for many years, 10, 20, 30 years, who know their kids, they know the families, right. They know their community, they know their runs, they're great at what they do, but they're capped at $21. And you have monitors who've been there for many years, they're capped at $11.22. And it's not just a shift that you go in and you work 8 hours and you come home. You work in the morning, then you have some time off, then you come back and you do another shift, so it's a split shift. And so that gives workers a tough time trying to get a second job. So what we're trying to do is to raise wages and that respects the work, respects the value that they bring to the community and keeps them there. And that's what the community deserves too. They deserve to have a community partner, a good community partner in their bus service that actually affords their own employees the opportunity to build a better future, right. Not only for them, but for their community too.
We also look at the fact that the standard rates nowadays in the Teamsters Local 251, they just did a contract with Ocean State right. and East Providence, and the starting rates there are $19.25. And then the same with the monitors, the starting rates are $14.25. So we're way below the standards, and that's what's going to help keep people to work there and retain the help. And safety is a major thing. I mean, so if somebody's there for 5-10 years, they know what their job is. I mean, you're not constantly hiring people. It's not a revolving door. And if you can retain help, then safety is the major, it ties right into that.
And these wage issues they're issues in and of themselves, but if the minimum wage changes, it's going to become a huge minimum wage issue as well, right? Because they'll be making under.
Well, I mean, we understand that's going to go to $11.50 in Rhode Island.
Right.
So at $11.22, they're going to be made minimum wage workers. Yeah. I mean, you can get a job any place for minimum wage. You can go to flipping burgers. I think the issue here is that the company needs to, get this message that they need to pay their workers a decent pay.
I mean, I know we'll go into this a little bit more soon, but it becomes a safety issue too when you have that turnover, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. With Cumberland, with Durham School Services offering, the lowest wages for their monitors and drivers in the state of Rhode Island. These are workers that can go work elsewhere. They can go to Lincoln, they can go to Pawtucket, they can go to Providence, they can go to East Providence and get a job making more money there. And like we're talking about, it really hurts the community of Cumberland, but also of BVP and PMA, because these parents that build these really important and special relationships with the monitors and drivers that carry the most precious cargo that we have, it's our children, they're constantly having to build new relationships with new workers, and that hurts service. That creates disruptions. And what ends up happening too is you end up having route doubling. So you have drivers going out there with now crowded buses, and that'll lead to late pickups and drop-offs as well, which the communities don't deserve.
Right. And are you finding that that's become an issue? Is late pickups and late drop-offs now?
It absolutely is, and this is the responsibility of management. And this is what happens when you do have high turnover. Workers come, they work for a little bit, but then they find out, I can make more money elsewhere. And we actually represent the bus drivers in Middleborough, Massachusetts, for a student, and they were just awarded the safest bus yard in the country because they're afforded a better life. They're afforded the opportunity to make a better wage, so they stay. So they know their roots, they know their families, they know the kids that they drive, and it's really important. That's what we're trying to do in Cumberland.
Yeah, and just going on with that, what Sam just said, they've been organized for 20 years, and they have drivers that have been there 25 years. And that's saying something. And when you are the best, safest company in the United States, and they're local 328 members.
I mean, that's what everybody should be striving for, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, in addition to the wage and turnover problems, I know that there was a complaint that was filed with DOL. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yes. When we were having those conversations with workers over the last summer, they told us that they weren't being paid time and a half on Sundays and holidays. So this is extra work. So if they have a charter trip that they go out on a Sunday, or let's say it's Thanksgiving, there's a football game and they work that holiday, they weren't being afforded the time and a half, which is state law. So we filed a complaint with the Department of Labor, and there's an investigation going on to make sure that these workers are compensated what they're owed.
And there was another complaint filed, right? What was that?
So we actually filed a charge against the company for failure to furnish information in a timely manner. And the Labor Board will actually be issuing a complaint against Durham very shortly to make sure that they do what's right and act as a good community partner and to come to the table and furnish the information that they're supposed to.
And in addition to the safety concerns of high turnover, not having monitors or bus drivers who are there and know their students because they can't afford to stay in the job, there's another safety concern of the monitors, or there even being monitors on buses. Can you explain this a little bit?
Sure. I mean, this is a concern that we've heard since the beginning of the campaign as well, is that with the company's failure to attract and retain help, and especially at $11.22 an hour, which, as Domenic pointed out, is well below the standard of what a monitor should be making in the state, they lose help. And so we hear stories all the time how workers or drivers are forced to go do routes without a monitor on board. And this is a safety issue because you have a bus full of students and scholars on board, and if a bus driver is having to focus on the road and making sure that they're safe out there, then it's important that they have a monitor on board that can keep an eye on the kids and make sure it's a safe space.
I mean, parents and community members should be outraged, right? That any buses are going out without a monitor on board.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So true.
And can you? So when did workers decide to join UFCW? Was that in September?
Yeah, we had the election on September 19th.
Okay. And what's the feedback from the company? How are negotiations going so far?
Well, what Sam had said earlier about the charge, the company, after we get certified, we send out an information request to the company on wages, benefits, seniority. The company just did not respond to our request.
And that was in September.
September,
right.
October. October it went out. We did not hear from the company. Actually, we sent a request to the company, and they finally got back to us, I think in early November, a month later. So at that point, right, we were behind the eight ball. We had no information to put our proposals together. So then at that time, we did hear from the company. I got a call from the HR person in St. Louis while they have a
New England
HR person, a New England person, does all the contracts in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, and our sister local 1459 in Springfield. So
They're forcing you to communicate with someone in St.
Correct.
Louis rather than the New England HR
Correct.
person. Okay.
So now we set dates for December. So we had 2 dates in December and just didn't get much done. So then January comes, we had 2 dates in January. Get a call from the person that's doing the contract and from St. Louis, and he says that he can't make it. So now we cancel out for January. Now we're looking at 4 months going by with just 2 meetings. We do have some meetings in February, but the tactics are to stall and just push this along so we don't ever get a contract.
Right.
So that's our concerns. They need to sit down and bargain with us and get a contract for what these workers deserve, raises, and also what the community deserves is have safety in these buses.
It seems exactly what you said. They're stalling, so it's delay, delay, delay until the last possible minute.
Exactly.
Now, what is the role that negotiations between the Teamsters and Ocean State Transit, what role has that played in this process? Do you foresee it playing in this process?
Well, I would say right now that what you said earlier about the standards and pay, I would just say that they all should be. If you need a yard, then you should be doing what they do and getting a contract done. Teamsters did some really good work, and they finally had to push the company to bargain, and they got a contract. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to be out there informing the community about this and letting them know that Durham needs to bargain in good faith.
So there's a standard set now, and you know exactly what actions worked and what to take. So what's next?
Well, as Domenic said, the big thing that we'll be doing is continuing to engage with the community because it is about them. It's about the service that the parents and the families of Cumberland and of BVP and PMA deserve. And as long as Durham continues to offer low wages with little benefits, it's going to jeopardize the safety and the service that these communities deserve. So we're going to be engaging with the families at sporting events and anywhere that we can to get the message out about what this campaign is about.
And like you said, until they change the wages and they are offering their bus drivers and monitors better benefits, nothing's going to change. Right?
No.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is taxpayer money. This is what the community deserves. Through their taxpayer dollars, is to have a good community partner in a transit service. And again, these are our kids we're talking about, and that's who we're standing up for.
And the community members who are watching now, our viewers, how can they get involved to stand up with the hardworking bus drivers and monitors right now? So
Durham School Services is actually a subsidiary of a larger company, a worldwide company called National Express. So we're urging anybody to call them, and their number is 1-800-950-0485. That's their corporate number. And I think that the more that the community hears or reaches out to National Express to let them know that, hey, listen, we want a good community partner in Durham, hopefully that will get the company to come to the table and do the right thing.
All right. Well, thank you guys both so much for being here, for
you.
talking about this issue. Anyone who's missed that number, we'll run it along the bottom as well.
Great, thank you so much.
For those of you watching at home, thank you so much for watching. You're watching Labor Vision. If you've missed any of this episode, check out our new website. It's www.laborvisionri.org. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen on this channel 3 times each week: Tuesday at 7 p.m., Thursday at 8 p.m., and Saturday at 5 p.m.